Today, the chapter is Edie Daly, I apologize if I mispronounced that, and Jackie Merkin, courtesy of Shanna Shirk. At least that's what the photo is. There we go. Okay, so let's begin. On a sunny December morning in Gulfport, Florida, just south of Tampa, which is accurate because I briefly lived around that area, I sat at the dining room table with Eddie and Jackie in their lovely apartment overlooking the water on both sides. The warmth and hospitality were complemented, there we go, by the beautiful view of the bay outside and original artwork hanging inside. This is their winter home. In summer months, they come north to beat the heat and are part of a community of older lesbians in Northampton, Massachusetts. I don't know where that is. I know where Massachusetts is, not Northampton, which is where photographer Shanna Shurek shot their portrait. Again, this is the lovely portrait. Eddie and Jackie have been activists for many of their later years. They met in their 60s. Aww. Moved to Florida in 1981 and were married in 2008. They were featured in Without Apology, Old Lesbian Life Stories, a book of interviews conducted by the Old Lesbian Oral Her Story Project. I feel like I should know about that, being a lesbian myself. For the moment our conversation began, from the moment our conversation began, these two bold lesbians stole my heart. That's really sweet. So, Eddie, born in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1937. Eddie was a suburban housewife and mother of three in the 1970s when she fell in love with a woman for the first time. In 1980, she marched in New York City with the lesbian Her Story Archives together with Joan Nessel, the archive's founder, and she had been a leader in the lesbian community for many years. She plays a leadership role in Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, OLOC, in Northampton, Massachusetts, is co-founder of the original radical feminist and lesbian St. Petersburg Salon, which met monthly from 1982 to 2007, and was one of the organizers of the more inclusive salon that started in 2015, open to all women, trans, bi, straight, or gay. I began by asking her where she was on the night of June 28th, 1969, so Stonewall. I do want to give a little comment here. It specifically states here she's co founder of the original radical feminist and lesbian St. Petersburg Salon, which met monthly from 1982 to 2007. That is very much in the radical feminists' big hubbubaloo, for lack of better phrasing. It effectively acted as down with men. Men are the source of all problems. We have to burn everything men have touched to the ground. We don't believe that women should be subjected to men in any sense of the word. Don't be a wife to them. It only uplifts them. You can't indulge in adult activities, the adult industry, anything like that, because you are a slave to a man. While personally, I feel that there is some merit to some ideas, it's a bit too much. It's one of those reel it in a little bit, kids. It's not. I don't want to say it's not that deep, but it's more of, again, this is just my personal opinion and views on it. It's just, it's one of those, take a sprinkle of it, don't cover the whole pizza. Just a tiny sprinkle. All right, back to this. Hidden in the suburbs. When Stonewall was happening, I was no longer living in New York City. I was living in the suburbs, Yorktown Heights, at a bedroom community near New York City. I was living with my husband and our three kids, and separated from all that was gay. My husband commuted to the city, but I didn't want to have my kids raised, so I had to watch. I didn't want to have my kids raised so that I had to watch them every minute. I wanted them to be able to be free. So there I was in the suburbs with my kids in 1969, and I saw on TV the treatment of the folks at Stonewall. I was still very much heterosexual. I had hidden my own identity from myself and from everybody else. I had always loved women, and I had crushes on women and girls and camp counselors, but I knew it was more than that. How did I meet my husband? I was a new Florida high school graduate at 18 in 1955 when I moved to New York City by myself to make my way in the big city. I met my future husband that next summer on a moonlit cruise up the Hudson River. I was on a blind date with another fellow, and Phil was my friend's date. It was quite a romantic evening, and we sang and we danced on the boat in the moonlight with the band in the water and the lights of the city passing by. What did I know of love except the romantic notions from the movies that filled a teenager's head in the 1950s? That was extremely very, like, princess era. Boy meets girl, courts her, everyone gets married, everyone has a happy ending. There was no remote mention of LGBTQ. Excuse me. It was late June, and we were both working in Manhattan, only blocks from each other. He was in advertising, and I worked as a mail girl at General Electric. He called the following day and asked me if I would like to go rowing in Central Park. We spent that day together, and then the next, and on July 2nd, on a little walk in Central Park, he proposed, and I said yes. We had known each other for only 4 days. He was 19 years old, a smooth talker, a charmer like my dad. I was an innocent young girl who had dated only twice. I was smitten with his charms and thought that this was what the American dream was about. I was supposed to get married and have kids. Secondary education was out of the question. My crushes on women pushed firmly away. No words to even suggest what I felt for women. We were married April 27th, 1957. I was 20, Phil 21. Our first son was born a year later, the second son 15 months after that, and the third boy when the first was 3. I had 3 babies in diapers by 1961. I knew that I was stuck in this abusive marriage until the youngest was out of school. So I put one foot in front of the other each day, saying to myself, tomorrow will be different, for 17 years, trapped in the suburbs. I did what I was supposed to do until 1974 when Darlene, a pseudonym, so, fake name for the sake of the story, and I fell in love. She kissed me, and with one kiss, my whole life unraveled. Unfortunately, that's the reality. Again, this is my own little input here. Um, that's the reality a lot of lesbian, gay, bisexual, etc. people lived with. They had to swallow their feelings. They couldn't explore anything. It was, pretend to be in love, or in the moment feel like you were in love when in reality you were just playing the part. A lot of LGBTQ people don't realize who they are until like their 20s, 30s. If you know who you are for certain and it doesn't change, starting in your teenage years or whatever, and again, it doesn't change 20s, 30s, you're one of the lucky ones. Back to the story. I knew without a doubt that this was what I had wanted all along. It felt like coming home. The church was where I was married and where I attended from 1953 to 61 was St. Uh, Ignatius. Ignatius. Not sure how to pronounce that. On Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was known as the gay church at the time. That's sweet. It wasn't talked about then, there was just something understood. Almost every one of the men that attended, and most of the folks at church, including the rector, were probably gay. They were in the arts. Yeah. It was a high Episcopal church, and we all loved the pomp and ritual. Later on, I learned that my husband had had affairs with almost all of the gay men in the church. Well, then. So I thought to myself, this frees me up some, and 14 years later, I fell in love with a woman. We worked in the same school system. I was the teacher's aide, and she was the teacher. And of course, we would have been fired if there was anything overt between us. I fell in love with her in 1974, 5 years after Stonewall. And I can remember at one point my husband calling her husband in the middle of the night and saying, "You know what, Marvin?" Pseudonym. "My wife is having an affair with your wife." And Marvin said, "Phil, you're crazy," and slammed down the phone. The thing I realized when I came out was that it was like coming home for me. It was indeed that place where I knew that this is who I am. Stonewall created a possibility. For me, Stonewall was a way of knowing that being lesbian was a possibility. 1974, when I came out, was the year that Alex Dopkin recorded Lavender Jane Loves Women with Kay Gardner and some other lesbian women folk singers. It was affirming. I found myself and the woman that I fell in love with in those lyrics. Between Darlene and me, we had two husbands and seven kids, so figuring out how to be together was not an easy thing to do. That is a lot of kids, but unfortunately not too surprising in that day and age because anything remotely, again, my input here, anything remotely similar to birth control, contraception, etc., was very rare, and it was kind of like black market hush hush, that kind of thing. Women have tried, women and people have tried to keep themselves from getting pregnant with a lot of variety of kind of do it yourself at home methods. We see this as at least as far back as Egypt and that kind of thing. So if there's a will, there's a way with these kind of things. Unfortunately, as potentially dangerous as some of the attempts at do it yourself were. Let's see here. Back to the story. After a few months, I finally told my husband I need a divorce, and he said, I tell you what, I'll leave and I'll be back in 2 months, and you'll see how much you miss me. And P.S., he never came back, and I never missed him. How did Stonewall affect my life? For me, it was the recognition that there's another way of being. I was stuck in an unhappy marriage. I certainly loved having my children, and I enjoyed raising them and that part of being married. I knew that when I came out that the kids were going to be a problem for our marriage. Not the only problem. He was an alcoholic and he was an abuser in many ways. Physically, verbally, etc. And he was gay himself, I think, but he would never recognize that. When I finally came out to him, he said that it was my fault our marriage didn't work. I was a lesbian, and so he was not to blame for our divorce. Stepping into Pride 1980. 3 years after I came out, I was ready, more than ready, to put my feet in the street. My lover had been raised a red diaper baby, so her orientation towards political activism and as a Jewish family, they were very active. They voted for Eugene Debs, and she was very much an activist for civil rights. On the other hand, I was not. I came from the South. I was born and raised in Florida. People say Florida is not the South, but Florida is the South. As someone who spent a good chunk of their own childhood years, my input here, the Florida is very much south. It is the south, but it is very much south. Um, back to the story. I didn't know or see any people of color. My schools were segregated. I was brought up totally with white privilege, and when I moved to the suburbs of New York, it was also what I called white bread. All of my neighbors were from the Bronx. They had moved out of the city to get away from integration. Typical 1960s white flight. That is very true. My first gay pride march was in New York in 1980. We marched with Joan Nessel and the woman from Lesbian Her Story Archives. We had huge and amazing picture of all these historical women who were lesbian, including Eleanor Roosevelt. Yay, queer rep. They were famous women who were not known to the world as lesbian. Here we were marching with the big balloons and the whole thing. To me, it was such a high to finally be able to see my community, my tribe as it were, and to be among them. What a heady thing it was to be able to be there. I was still very much in the closet at home in the suburbs, but this was a place where I could be out. My input here. This is why pride showings, the colors, the flags, the parades, the marches, even if it's just a single person holding, a rainbow flag up, it's so important because we have always existed. We're never going to go away. We're here. And there is nothing unnatural about being LGBTQ. That's just the reality of it. Back to the story here. Joan Nessel and other members of the Gay Academic Union founded the Lesbian History Archives in 1975 as several women decided they needed a separate space to discuss women's issues. Two conscientiousness, that word's hard to say, raising groups formed, and one of them became the founding site of the Lesbian History Archives. For the first 15 years, the archives was housed in Nessel's Manhattan apartment. Today it occupies 3 stories of a Brooklyn townhouse. That is lovely. From the beginning, it has been a grassroots community collective effort, staffed and managed entirely by volunteers, operating on inclusive and non-institutional principles and making its resources available without restrictions to all lesbians as well as researchers. Today, the Archives is the world's largest collection of material by and about lesbians and lesbian communities. Books, movies, newsletters, posters, not TVs, t shirts, music, and more. That is so lovely, and I really want to go to that. There was a woman in one of the nearby towns who hosted baseball games. Although I never played ball, we went to the baseball games because that was where we could find other lesbians. Oh, that's funny. Then once we went down to Greenwich Village to the Oscar Wilde bookshop. We found a little flyer about a group of women who are living in a women's community called A Woman's Place in Athol, New York. We thought we'd take a ride up there. We went the day after Labor Day. They were cleaning up, and because the season was over for them, they were all doing their jobs, and we were left in the living room, kind of like still wondering, are they lesbians or are they not lesbians? What's going on here? On the coffee table, we saw the Lavender Jane Loves Women album. That told us they were lesbians. Still, we live in this homophobic secret because we were afraid for our jobs and afraid of who we were. Politically, I think that the 1977 march was when I realized that I wanted to be a political lesbian. I wanted to do everything in my power to find my people, to know that we were okay, and to let the world know who we were. I listened to Alex Dopkin, one of the members of the musical group Lavender Jane, who said that the word lesbian, who said the word lesbian from the stage. And she would say, I say lesbian during my concerts because when I was 15, I didn't hear anybody say that word. I was beginning to incorporate the lyrics of Alex and Margie Adam and Holly Near and Chris Williamson and Meg Christian, and they became my own words. I didn't know what to say because music is such a big part of my life. The music and those lyrics got into my body and my psyche and became my own words. The same as with the oppressor's words, they are no longer the oppressor's words when they come out of your own mouth. I had internalized that homophobia and I had internalized that oppression. In the same way, I began to internalize the empowerment. And so for me, the change that came by learning new ideas of women's empowerment is what got me on the road to becoming a political activist for lesbian rights. That is a mouthful, and as a little mini short pause, here is one of the photographs in the book. New York City Pride in 1980, courtesy of Lesbian History Archives. I've seen, this is a very pixelated photograph of this, but I have seen this before. If you couldn't see it well, because again, pixels, Lesbian Herster, it's a group of what looks like women marching down New York City. They have a banner that says Lesbian Her Story Archives in memory of the Yorkies that we have lost. All right. So what happened there? We are at the coming out part. What was my social activism during the time of Stonewall? I was 37 when I came out in 1974. Because I had a job in the school and my kids were in the same school district, I was closeted and nobody ever said anything about me being a lesbian. The microaggressions, as we call it now, those everyday slurs and homophobic jokes were directed at other people or just in general. I knew to keep my mouth shut because I knew that if I came out, I was going to be the target for aggression and oppression. In 1981, my partner Darlene retired from the school system and we moved to Florida. Before we left New York, there was a large dinner dance for the retirees. Darlene and I danced together on the dance floor, and people there either thought I knew that's what was happening, or they were totally shocked and saying, "What? What are you doing?" We told them, "We're moving. We're leaving here. We're selling the house and moving to Florida. Goodbye." Even though we knew there was nothing wrong with loving each other, we also knew not to venture beyond the prescribed line. I think the secretary made her decide to take early retirement even more than just the money. Moving away meant we no longer have to live in the closet. We could come to Florida and start a new life, and we did. The Well of Happiness. We started with the now National Organization of Women Community. We opened a bookstore called The Well of Happiness instead of The Well of Loneliness, the title of Radcliffe Hall's famous 1928 lesbian novel, which was Code. The bookstore was here on Madeira Beach in Florida. We started a salon, and within 2 months, we knew 250 women. The salon went monthly for 25 years. That was the beginning of our really lesbian lives. And we talked about every single issue. We started it with feminist conscientiousness. Well, that's hard to say. That there would be no one leader. Everybody would be a leader. For 25 years, we worked with consensus. It was amazing. Many times it took a long time to reach a consensus. You could imagine in a large community, there was never fewer than 65 women who came to the salon, sometimes 100, every single month. It was the alternative to the bars. The group decided in the third month that we would be in solidarity with our sisters who were in recovery, and that anything that was sponsored by our salon would be chemical free and alcohol free. Every single issue that you can imagine we talked about, we grew together as a lesbian community. One of my keystone books was Starhawk's Dreaming in the Dark. There was no difference between action, passion, and politics. Everything is connected. My political action came out of my sexuality and who I am. The personal is political. That's who I am, and therefore that's who I want to be integrating my whole life. We talk a lot about competing oppressions. Who is the most oppressed? It is a fallacy that one's oppression is more worthy than another. This is what intersectionality is all about, the oppressions of race, class, gender, and orientation. Intersectionality is often used to describe a multiplicity of oppressions. Originally coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar, Crenshaw published the term in an article examining what she calls a problematic consequence of the tendency to treat race and gender as mutually exclusive categories of experience analysis. If you can't bring your whole self to the table, if I can't bring my whole self to everything I do, then there's a piece that is really missing, and it's a basic fundamental piece. It's not just like, oh, the flowers are missing from the table. It's something intrinsically not there. And I have to skip a bit because it's very explicit and there's no way I could, do a beep or a censor or find alternative words. So there's that. I apologize. If you're reading along, it is from pages 122 to 124. And again, as much as I want to show the photo on this page, I cannot because I'll get hit with a bam hammer. So descriptor wise, it is a black and white photo from 1994 of women uh, marching down the street. It is the annual lesbian march in New York City. It starts with a D, ends with an E, has the letters YK in it. So again, I don't want to get hit with a social media ban hammer. So just know that's what's going on with that. So the next section is teaching younger people. One of the things that happened a couple of years ago was that the Old Lesbian Organizing for Change, OLOC group in Northampton invited the Smith College students to come, and we had a wonderful group. There were 25 old lesbians and 25 young queer women. One of the things we did was two fishbowls. One was 6 old lesbians talking what they don't want to hear from the younger generation, like, don't call me young lady, or say, you don't look your age. The second group was 6 young lesbians, the young queer woman, oh queer. I should not say women because some don't want to be called women. Speaking about what they don't want to hear, things like, you have it easy. I understand faux cult, and I understand that we really need to have no separations in who we are because of broad gender spectrum of who we are. And I also understand the need for identity politics until it all changes. Both and not either or. The young women from Smith were saying, we understand about being queer, but we also want to call ourselves lesbian. And if we say that we are lesbian, we are betraying the queer community, and they don't accept us. We need a place for us to be. And so when the students were able to articulate this, the professor who was in the room said, I will find you a place. What are your needs? Because we always say nothing about us without us. At one of our salons in 2002, we invited a trans woman to talk with us about transgender issues. This issue actually split our community right down the middle. It was very contentious. After 25 years, we were no longer of the same mind. After a few more years, salon gatherings stopped. In 2011, Women's Words, our publication, published its 28th and last issue. I think it was the final controversy. This new sexual and gender revolution will not happen without anger. Anger directed in a positive place is always what spurs people to change, and it's often the young people who do the changing. They're going to do it very differently than we did. That is the perspective from, let me come back here, from Edie. The second half of the chapter is about Jackie. So I think that's a good place to stop naturally. But I think that was a good rundown of lesbian history from Miss Edie's perspective. Everyone's queer journey is different, and I really liked that they brought up the fact that not all lesbians in their lesbian group meetings were saying we're queer. Some of us, we don't identify with women, but we do identify as lesbians. And I know that makes a lot of fur bristle from, especially the younger generation of queers, but it's not anyone's place to come up to someone and say, you don't belong here, when in reality, you don't know their history. You don't know any potential, internal trauma. You don't know any internalized religious problems or, growing up in a very homophobic thing. It could be that they don't feel any, they've made peace with that part of themselves, but still feel a strong connection to this word. And it's not up to us to say, you don't belong here. Like for myself, I am in a queer platonic relationship with a cis man who I see as, you protect me. I like that we have a lot of similar hobbies. You're my nesting partner because we, we have a strong connection there with each other. He romantically loves me. He loves me in a very intimate way. And for me, I love the fact that we share a lot of hobbies. I'm asexual. I'm aromantic. I'm a lesbian. They are not. They are a very cis hetero man. And we respect that out of each other. He doesn't want to change me. I don't want to change him. We happen to cohabitate in the same space. And I love him in a very queer way. I don't love him in the heteronormative way. What do I mean by that? I do not love him the way I was raised to love a man. Heavy quotes around that. I do not see him as my knight in shining armor. I do not see him as, you are sweeping me off my feet and you're going to protect me from all the bad things. That's, no. I reject that. I reject that premise. But that's kind of like everything trickled, boiled down to the bare bones meat of our relationship. And most of it is the fact that I love that we have a lot of similar hobbies. We intellectually challenge each other. We might have different views on something that's a very controversial topic, and we actually talk about it like adults. I like that we can, help each other think about, oh, I didn't think about that perspective before, or something like that, because we all have our own internal biases, blind spots, etc. So that's the long and the short of my relationship with them. I don't call them my zucchini or squish because outside of, like very, very deep queer conversations and terminology, no one knows what that word means, and no one would take that seriously. At least that's how I feel about it. I call them my partner. I sometimes call them my boyfriend because of the lack of phrasing that isn't really in the common lingo in, society. So that was that. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I have some doctor's appointments going on this week relating to my blood pressure because it keeps, dropping, as well as my heart rate skyrocketing, which it shouldn't be doing. That's dangerous. So we'll be going over that. We will be going over the chronic pain in my neck area with the other doctors. So that's that. Thank you so very much for joining us. Genuinely. Heart, heart, heart. On this side of the screen are my socials. I post everything about, what's going on in my life when I'm streaming. learn more about my personality, my interests, etc. We do have a Patreon, Krolixzima, my gamer tag, and you get to have more in-depth discussions about the books we read on stream, like Stonewall Generation. We can, talk freely without fear of censorship there because it's a queer educational historical archive space. We, decide what book is going to be next. After Pride, I'm not sure what book we will be tackling, but, I still have a month basically to decide. So, anyway, that was Stonewall Generation. Next stream, we'll be tackling Miss Jackie Merkin's half of that chapter. So, thank you so very much for joining us, and I will see you guys on the next stream, whenever that will be. I will post it on the socials here on the side of the screen, and I will see y'all later. Bye!